Hey there and welcome back. Tonight we're traveling back in time, way back, to a world before beds, before coffee, before anything remotely comfortable, and discovering exactly why you wouldn't have survived being a caveman. It's cold, it's muddy, and frankly, it smells terrible. But don't worry, you won't need a spear. Just a blanket, maybe a cup of tea, and a willingness to laugh quietly at how hopeless we'd all be without Wi-Fi. If that sounds like your kind of bedtime story, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment letting me know how long you think you'd last out there. My personal guess is about 12 minutes. Now take a deep breath and let's step back 50,000 years. Let's begin with a simple thought experiment. Imagine for a moment that you are not yourself, not the person you are now in your cushioned bed with access to hot coffee, Netflix, and the blessed Wi-Fi of civilization. Instead, you are me, or, more accurately, the version of me that somehow woke up 50,000 years ago. Congratulations. I assure you, this is a worse idea than it sounds. I open my eyes, or at least, I think I open my eyes. Darkness greets me, though darkness is a generous term for what feels more like a damp, vaguely threatening cave with patches of stone glistening suspiciously. The air smells let's call it aromatic rather than offensive, but only if you have remarkably low standards. There is a wetness here that is not entirely condensation, and I realize too late that the floor I have chosen to sleep upon is more stone than comfort. My shoulder aches, my spine is a question mark, and my life choices have been, as usual, a series of regrettable decisions culminating in this exact moment. I sit up slowly, mindful that any sudden movement could be my last, or at least the last, before some unknown predator decides to check my pulse. My hands brush against a cold, hard surface that I assume is meant to be a bed, but is actually an unfeeling lump of rock. There is also something vaguely squishy nearby, though I am reasonably certain it is not an ancient pillow, and more certain that I will never know what it actually is. I consider the logistics of curling into a fetal position and decide against it. The stone floor does not negotiate. The cave is quiet in the kind of way that suggests the possibility of sudden death. It is not the quiet of a Sunday morning when the kettle is whistling in the background. No, this is the quiet of a place that is ancient, indifferent, and occasionally hungry. I imagine that every sound I make, a cough, a shiver, even a muttered expletive, might echo ominously and attract the attention of something that eats people. Or worse, something that eats me slowly while I try to remember which end of a stick is sharp. There is naturally the expectation that I will now perform a variety of tasks essential to survival: fire, food, clothing, shelter. All of these things exist in theory, but my personal skill set is insufficient. I have never started a fire without a lighter or match, never butchered anything larger than a supermarket chicken, and I once tripped over a plastic bag in my own kitchen. Yet here I am, a hopelessly unprepared hominid, staring at the cold, damp wall of a cave and trying to convince myself that survival is an achievable ambition. Spoiler, it is not. I take a cautious step forward. My foot lands on something squelchy. My eyes adjust enough to discern that it is likely not important. Or perhaps everything is important. The problem with a cave is that it is largely made up of the same substances: rock, shadow, and occasional mystery matter. Above me, the ceiling drips slowly, each droplet striking with the soft, mocking rhythm of a clock counting down my likely demise. I do not know what time it is, but time feels like an arbitrary luxury when everything else is actively conspiring against you. I begin to examine my surroundings with the careful curiosity of someone who knows that one wrong move could be fatal. And all I find are rocks, a few indistinct markings that may be cave art or may simply be stains, and shadows that definitely have opinions about me. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of what I assume is a stream or possibly something larger echoes through the cavern. It is soothing and terrifying in equal measure. There is, I realize, a lot about this place that I will never truly understand. And yet, despite all this, I feel compelled to continue, not because I am brave, but because the alternative, lying still and letting the cave decide my fate, is frankly too dull. Survival, as I quickly learn, is not glamorous. It is wet, uncomfortable, and requires a degree of cunning that I can confidently say I do not possess. While my ancestors may have thrived here, I am reasonably certain they would have looked at me, raised one bushy eyebrow, and moved on to someone less incompetent. I glance at what I suppose is the cave entrance. Light filters in weakly, a promise of a world outside that might include food that does not bite back, shelter that does not drip water onto your head, and beds that do not double as medieval torture devices. It occurs to me that humans at this time had approximately 1 million things to worry about, and I've already failed at roughly half of them. This is my first day. I am ambitious in the wrong ways. In the background, the faint rustling of something alive reminds me that I am not alone. Predators, other humans, insects of terrifying size, and perhaps all three at once share this space. I could attempt to hunt, but I have no weapons, no strategy, and frankly, no real desire to die trying. Perhaps I will forage. Perhaps I will cower behind a rock until whatever passes by decides that I am not worth the trouble. Either way, I have a growing existential sense that the term survival of the fittest is not a motivational slogan, but a polite euphemism for good luck, idiot. And so begins my journey into the prehistoric nightmare of being a caveman, or more accurately, a prehistoric version of me. A creature of minimal skills, maximal complaints, and just enough self-awareness to know that this is not going to end well. If you are listening to this, imagine yourself in my shoes. Or rather, imagine that you have no shoes. Your clothes are animal hides and the morning is still 15 hours away. You are about to embark on a slow, exhausting, often humiliating exploration of just how poorly equipped we humans are for anything without modern conveniences. Sleepily comforting, isn't it? Knowing that while I flounder in mud, darkness, and mild existential terror, you are somewhere cozy, perhaps sipping tea, perhaps under multiple blankets, perhaps even in a bed that is soft enough to be considered vaguely sinful. You have survived the greatest threat of all, being born in the right era. Now let us take a deep breath together and step fully into this world. It will be damp, it will be cold, and it will be humiliating. But above all, it will be strangely educational and, if nothing else, extremely satisfying in the I am not that person way. Welcome to the Stone Age, and no, you would not have survived it either. The first sensation I register is a cold shock that can only be described as bone-chilling in the literal sense. Not figuratively, not poetically. Literally, my bones are questioning every life choice that led them to this damp slab of rock. My eyes flutter open to darkness so complete it makes a blackout seem like a well-lit ballroom. Somewhere above me a ceiling drips steadily, each droplet a tiny, mocking punctuation mark in the sentence of my life. I lie there for a moment, attempting to convince myself that this is a luxurious spa treatment, perhaps with mineral water benefits, but even my imagination refuses to lie this convincingly. Eventually, necessity, the kind that gnaws at your bladder and your pride, forces me upright. My limbs move stiffly, as if I have forgotten what bones are meant to do. One hand brushes against a lump of something vaguely unpleasant. I try to ignore it, but the smell confirms my worst suspicions. The previous night's sleeping arrangement is more of a collaboration with mold and unknown organic matter than a proper bed. Modern humans would weep to see the state of my morning mattress. I stretch cautiously, mindful of the potential for injury. Every joint pops like a poorly constructed hinge, reminding me that evolution, while competent in many ways, was not kind to my particular clumsiness. Slowly I rise and peer out of the cave entrance. Pale light spills in, illuminating a world that is simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. The grass outside shivers in the breeze. Birds squawk with a nonchalant disregard for my suffering. And somewhere distant, the roar of a predator, or perhaps just a very large, noisy animal, reminds me that breakfast may not be optional. Speaking of breakfast, the first order of business is sustenance. Modern convenience has trained me poorly. I instinctively reach for the imaginary pantry or coffee maker, only to remember that here, the closest thing to a kettle is an idea, and the closest thing to cereal is, well, there isn't one. Instead, I consider my options. Roots, berries, insects or the leftovers of last night's unfortunate mammoth hunt. I briefly entertain a mental list of acceptable foods and immediately discard most of it. There is no way I am eating the mystery meat that may or may not still be moving. First, though there are other hygienic necessities, teeth cleaning, for instance, is not optional. Even in the Stone Age, one cannot ignore basic oral maintenance without risking a rather dramatic and immediate dental crisis. I grab a twig that I suppose is meant to be a toothbrush. Twigs are unpleasantly splintery, but apparently effective in some distant, vaguely documented way. I gnaw and scrub at my teeth while simultaneously considering the existential unfairness of my situation. How is it that humans survived this way for tens of thousands of years, while I struggle to maintain oral hygiene for even 10 minutes? The task of fire-making looms large, like a silent, judgmental deity. In modern life, lighting a fire is a 5-second process with a flick of a match or the press of a button. Here, it is a full-contact sport that involves friction, patience, and the unspoken understanding that failure will result in discomfort, cold, and probably mild humiliation. I kneel on the ground, attempting to generate sparks from 2 sticks. Nothing happens. I try again. Nothing. I consider giving up, but the cave is cold enough to freeze one's soul, and my stomach is growling in protest. Attempt 3, 4, 5. Eventually, smoke begins to rise from the pitiful pile of wood. I feel a fleeting victory, quickly tempered by the realization that the flames are temperamental and may, at any second, retreat into polite invisibility. By the time I've managed something resembling a fire, my stomach demands immediate attention. I examine the mammoth remains with the kind of skepticism normally reserved for experimental cuisine. There is meat, there is questionable odor, there is the faintest trace of hope that the mammoth enjoyed its last meal somewhere else. Because otherwise the flavor is difficult to describe without gagging, I settle for cooking it over the fire, which does improve things slightly. Cooking, I remind myself, is a modern convenience we take for granted. Even a caveman version of me can appreciate the small mercy of warm meat, though I must also acknowledge that it is still, at best, edible if you squint. And now, of course, I am not alone. Other cavemen or cave dwellers or proto-humans or whatever term anthropology has agreed upon this week have begun their morning routines. Observing them is simultaneously fascinating and horrifying. 1. Male, impressively muscular and covered in fur, appears to be sharpening a spear with such focus that I briefly consider surrendering all my personal ambitions to him. Another, however, has just sneezed into his hand and immediately touched everything within reach. My optimism diminishes. Civilization, I realize, was invented for a reason. The social interactions of the morning are subtle but consequential. There is grunting, which I gather may be conversational, though I am not confident. A gesture here, a suspiciously large roll of the eyes there. One particularly robust female has fashioned a necklace from small bones, which seems both stylish and a bit terrifying. I consider the social ramifications of my own appearance, unwashed, bedraggled, and in possession of absolutely no adornments beyond the inevitable twig lodged in my hair, and decide quietly that this tribe may view me as a cautionary tale rather than a peer. Despite this, survival requires observation. I watch as my neighbors engage in their morning activities. Some are proficient. They draw water from a stream with practiced ease. They tend to their fires, and their movements suggest a lifetime of efficiency I can only admire from a distance. Others are less successful. One man trips over a small rock, falls face first into mud, and somehow emerges with more enthusiasm than skill. I begin to suspect that competence may be unevenly distributed, even among our early ancestors, which is both comforting and discouraging. Comforting because perhaps I am not uniquely terrible. Discouraging because, for all I know, competence may be correlated with survival, and my odds remain statistically miserable. Breakfast is finished. Fire is somewhat stable. I have attempted rudimentary hygiene. I take stock of my situation. Outside, the sun is rising, scattering light over a landscape that is both breathtaking and vaguely threatening. Somewhere, a distant roar reminds me that danger is not theoretical. My limbs are stiff. My stomach is only partially satisfied, and I have just enough self-awareness to realize that the rest of the day will be entirely dedicated to pretending I know what I am doing. The morning drags on, punctuated by small victories and minor catastrophes. I attempt to fashion some semblance of clothing from animal hides, only to end up with something that looks less like a tunic and more like a lopsided curtain. The fire requires constant attention, which means repeated kneeling, fanning, and occasional swearing. Every small task takes 10 times longer than I expect, a cruel trick of time and human ineptitude. I briefly fantasize about my modern life. Cereal, indoor plumbing, hot showers. Then I remember that indulging in such fantasies is unhelpful and potentially fatal. Finally, I take a moment to observe the world around me, because this, I realize, is one of the few pleasures of prehistoric life. The light of dawn catches on the dew-covered grass. Birds sing in a manner that is both musical and slightly judgmental, and the air smells of rain, soil, and the faint tang of something I would rather not identify. In the distance, the outline of a herd of animals, likely edible, potentially dangerous, is just beginning its morning wander. I imagine hunting, though I know I will almost certainly fail spectacularly. Even imagining it makes me sweat preemptively, and yet despite every hardship, every moment of acute self-consciousness, every dripping cave ceiling and mildly terrifying neighbor, I am alive. For now. Which in the Stone Age is no small feat. One wrong step, one misjudged spear, one lapse in attention, and it could all be over. I consider this as I kneel beside the fire, gnawing cautiously on a morsel of mammoth meat, and remind myself that survival, for someone like me, is less about skill and more about stubbornness, minor luck, and an unreasonable tolerance for discomfort. Morning. In the Stone Age concludes not with triumph, but with a wary acknowledgement. I am here, I am cold, I am hungry, and I am wholly unprepared for the day ahead. But there is a certain charm in this struggle, a rhythm to the chaos and a humor in the absurdity of it all. I am a caveman, yes, but a caveman who thinks, complains, and internally critiques his neighbors. Perhaps this is my greatest advantage, or, more likely, my only consolation. And so the first morning passes, not with glory but with survival. My teeth are crudely clean, my belly is partially full, and I have successfully avoided any immediate predators, which I am told is considered an achievement. Outside, the sun climbs higher, casting light on a world that is beautiful, brutal, and entirely indifferent to my existence. I steel myself for the tasks to come, knowing that hunting, gathering, and general incompetence await in equal measure. The sun has barely warmed the ground, but already I feel the full weight of my inadequacy pressing down upon me. Hunger is a sharp companion, and my stomach gnaws with that particular tone of passive-aggressive judgment that only caveman digestion seems capable of. I remind myself for the 100th time that today's task is hunting, or at least a version of hunting that won't involve immediate dismemberment. I gather my tools, which are, in my case, a sharpened stick that might have been intended for either spear or toothpick, a rock that looks pointy but is probably just heavy, and my sheer unadulterated incompetence. I glance toward the trees, where prey might reasonably be expected. I suppose that by prey I mean something that will sustain me for the next few hours without killing me first. Even this modest goal seems ambitious. My first attempt is one of stealth. I creep forward, keeping my movements subtle, or as subtle as a 30-something man in loincloth can manage. Every step is loud, each twig snapping underfoot like an ominous drumbeat. Somewhere a bird takes flight in alarm, and I'm fairly certain it is mocking me. Ahead, a small herd of deer, or something that might be deer, grazes without any awareness of the disaster approaching them. I pause, my heart hammering, ready to perform the ancient ritual of predator and prey. Or, more accurately, the modern ritual of panic and flailing. I step again, snap. A twig cracks beneath my foot with the audacity of a very loud, very judgmental orchestra conductor. The deer look up. I freeze, which is a good move in theory, except that my knees are weak. and I wobble like a puppet whose strings were cut halfway through rehearsal. My face contorts in what I hope is a convincing "I am the predator" expression, but I suspect it reads more like "I am confused and possibly edible." The deer, unconvinced, bolt in a single elegant bound, leaving me with nothing but a cloud of dust and my bruised ego. Attempt number 2 involves throwing the spear. Ideally, a spear throw is a graceful, precise movement informed by millennia of evolutionary experience. Realistically, my throw is a desperate flail, a mixture of panic and misunderstanding of physics. The spear hits a tree trunk, bounces off, and lodges itself in the ground just inches from my foot. I step back quickly, narrowly avoiding a self-inflicted disaster, and mutter something that I hope will not offend any nearby spirits of nature. Watching my neighbors is humbling. One man moves through the underbrush with a lethal elegance, every step silent, every gesture measured. He dispatches a rabbit with what appears to be minimal effort and carries it away with the casual air of a man walking his dog. Another, meanwhile, has tripped over a log, fallen face first into mud, and emerges with a triumphant grin as if he had achieved some great feat. I note that chaos and competence coexist here, often within the same individual, though I am fairly certain I am entirely on the chaos side of the equation. Undeterred, I attempt another approach, camouflage. I crouch behind a bush, imagining myself invisible, the pinnacle of stealth. In reality, I resemble a lumpy, awkward, greenish-brown sack, swaying slightly in the wind. The animal, perhaps out of pity, or perhaps sensing my hopelessness, decides to run away immediately. I leap forward in panic, aiming to chase, only to stumble over a root and land face first in mud. My spear flies 2 meters away, landing in a puddle that now claims it as its own. I lie there for a moment, contemplating life choices, evolution, and the possibility of turning entirely vegetarian. At one point, I discover a small stream. Brilliant, I think, water. Perhaps I can at least fill my bladder without further incident, yet the stream is also home to slippery rocks, cold water, and the faint possibility of being observed by creatures with sharper teeth than my own. My feet slip, and I topple forward, splashing water onto my already damp clothes. I am soaked, muddy, and mildly ashamed. The deer, or something that looks like deer, stare at me with what I can only interpret as judgment. Attempt number 3 is a blend of desperation and improvisation. I pick up a rock, intending to throw it with sufficient force to stun or distract. The rock, unfortunately, travels roughly 2 inches from my intended target and lands in a clump of grass with a dull thud. I imagine the animal laughing. I try, again this time swinging the spear like a sword in a dramatic arc, and narrowly miss impaling myself. There is a lesson here, I think, about hubris, gravity, and the hazards of being overconfident with pointy objects. By midday, I am exhausted, scratched, and profoundly aware that survival requires skills I simply do not possess. Hunger grows, more insistent, and my stomach's gurgling sounds like a tiny, impatient orchestra. My neighbors return from their hunts. They carry meat. I carry shame. One man hands me a fish, presumably out of pity. I accept it gratefully, though my pride whispers that this is not honorable, merely necessary. I attempt one final strategy, distraction hunting. I bang 2 sticks together, shout a little, and hope the animal approaches, curious or confused. Instead, a flock of birds erupts from a nearby tree, scattering in every direction, with a flurry of wings and judgmental chirping. One particularly smug squirrel watches me from a branch. I nod solemnly, acknowledging its superiority. Eventually, I give up on the idea of being a competent hunter and resort to gathering small, less mobile creatures, snails, worms, and insects. Not glamorous, but edible. I chew carefully, reminding myself that survival is more important than dignity. I glance around to ensure no predators are nearby, and mutter thanks to whatever deity governs small, squirmy protein sources. The remainder of the day is a mixture of minor achievements and spectacular failures. I manage to avoid falling into a stream again. I prevent the spear from impaling my own leg, and I even scavenge a few edible roots without incident. Each small success is a quiet victory, in a world where large-scale success is rare, and the margin for error is razor thin. As the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, I drag myself back to the cave, arms empty of real prey but full of experience, exhaustion, and minor cuts. The fire, thankfully, is still smoldering. I warm my small collection of gathered food, chewing thoughtfully, and reflect on the day's lessons. That nature is beautiful, terrifying, and indifferent. That hunting requires coordination, patience, and skill. And that I, personally, would likely have starved within the first week if left entirely to my own devices. And yet, despite all of this, there is amusement to be found. Watching animals, observing neighbors, failing spectacularly at every attempt, this is strangely entertaining. Perhaps it is the dry humor of existence itself, or perhaps it is simply that my ego needs something to cling to. In any case, I am alive if marginally beaten down, and ready for tomorrow's challenges, gathering, foraging, and continuing my education in the brutal, hilarious world of prehistoric survival. By evening, I have learned an important truth. Hunting is an art. I am not an artist, and the universe will remind me of this every time I lift a stick. Tomorrow promises more lessons, more minor injuries, and more absurdity. And through it all, I endure. Night had not yet fallen, though the sun's descent cast long shadows across the landscape. My body ached in ways I did not know were possible for a human being, each muscle screaming reminders of my spectacular inadequacy as a hunter. My hands were blistered, my feet sore, and my pride, well, it had been shredded in ways that made me question the very concept of self-respect. Yet, stubbornness, or perhaps a misguided sense of duty, compelled me to continue. I decided, against all better judgment, to stalk a small herd of grazing animals. Small is a relative term, I quickly discovered. These creatures were nimble, quick, and clearly suspicious of anything resembling a human with poor balance and no coordination. I crouched low, attempting the kind of stealth that might have been effective if I were an actual hunter, instead of a man resembling a misplaced sack of potatoes. The first step was to inch forward. I lifted my foot carefully, only to hear it crunch a bed of twigs with all the subtlety of a marching band. The animals froze, I froze. We stared at each other in mutual recognition. They recognized incompetence. I recognized imminent failure. In a flurry of panic, I lunged forward, which only succeeded in tangling my legs in roots, causing me to stumble headlong into a bush. My spear went flying, a kind of missile with no target, and disappeared into the foliage. The animals bolted. I lay face first in dirt and leaves, blinking and muttering under my breath in what may have been an archaic form of self-directed expletives. The bush was merciless, scratching my face and tangling in my hair. Somewhere a bird shrieked as if judging me personally. I took a moment to breathe, dirt in my nostrils, pride in tatters, and considered a new career, sitting very still and observing trees. Trees, I felt, could be relied upon. Eventually, I managed to extricate myself from the bush, though not without pulling a twig from somewhere it ought not to be. My next idea, in the desperate logic of someone rapidly approaching, despair was the ambush method. Find a high vantage point, wait for the prey to wander by and strike. This, I assumed, would require patience. It would also require balance, coordination, and knowledge of physics, all qualities I manifestly lacked. I climbed a small slope, heart hammering, only to discover that gravity was a relentless, unsympathetic force. Halfway up, my foot slipped, and I tumbled in a sequence of rolls that could only be described as humiliatingly spectacular. I landed in a puddle, water and mud soaking me thoroughly, my spear now lodged in a small tree at an angle that suggested both pity and mockery. I paused, wet and cold, to appreciate the irony. I had begun the day as a man with hope, and now I was a mud-caked disaster contemplating the improbable survival of small woodland creatures. Still, survival is an unforgiving teacher. Hunger reminded me that meals will not present themselves politely. I limped toward a cluster of shrubs, intending to at least catch something edible. A rabbit, small, fast, and apparently aware of my inadequacy, hopped within reach. I lunged. Missed, it hopped again. I lunged again, missed again, spectacularly, tripping over a rock and landing on my backside. The rabbit, with what I swear was smug satisfaction, disappeared into the underbrush. I considered my options: despair, fainting, or abandoning hunting entirely. Partially out of pride, partially out of sheer stubbornness, I tried a different strategy: imitation. I crouched behind a rock and attempted to mimic the sounds of an injured animal, hoping to lure in a predator, or at least a scavenger that might be edible. The results were predictably poor. Birds scattered. A squirrel regarded me with visible confusion. I'm fairly certain a fox laughed. If laughter has ears, a fox was definitely hearing it. I lay flat against the rock, sighing, mud dripping down my arm, realizing that my hunter's instinct was closer to endangered amateur flailing in a forest. Time passed. I do not know how long. Hours seem to stretch infinitely when one is failing at hunting. My stomach rumbled with growing insistence, my throat was dry, and my patience was non-existent. I surveyed my surroundings. The animals remained elusive. My neighbors had already bagged prey, and I was now the protagonist in a cautionary tale about human ineptitude. I could almost hear the prehistoric equivalent of laughter echoing through the trees, mocking my every movement. Then a faint glimmer of hope. A small bird landed within reach, pecking at the ground. I prepared to strike with my stick. Slow, calculated, deliberate, I swung, missed. The bird flew away, giving me a look that I swear was disdainful. I muttered something, possibly a curse, and considered a simpler approach: scavenging. At least, scavenging didn't involve moving quickly, balancing, or understanding aerodynamics. Scavenging, I discovered, had its own challenges. Roots and edible plants can be tricky. One mushroom looked safe, until I remembered that mushrooms are particularly good at masquerading as both edible and poisonous. I ate it anyway, reasoning that hunger is a persuasive teacher and my stomach had a sense of adventure. It was edible, but not enjoyable. At least it was not lethal. I counted that as progress. By late afternoon, my attempts had resulted in 3 minor scratches, 2 bruises, 1 partially soaked loincloth, and exactly 0 successful kills. I returned to the cave, weary, muddy, and profoundly aware of my limitations. The other cavemen regarded me with expressions that I can only describe as polite astonishment, mixed with what may have been pity. One offered me a piece of his successful catch, which I accepted humbly, noting silently that gratitude is sometimes the only dignity one retains. As I sat beside the fire that had been coaxed back into life with considerable effort, chewing my modest share of meat, I reflected on the lessons of the day. Hunting, it turns out, is an art form, one that requires patience, skill, and grace, qualities I apparently lack in spectacular fashion. Survival in the wild is not a casual endeavor. It is a continuous test of competence, resilience, and luck. And while I may be alive, I am keenly aware that I have barely passed the first grade of prehistoric living. Still, there is something to be said for observation, watching animals, noticing the effortless skill of my neighbors, and acknowledging my own spectacular failures provides a unique form of amusement. It is dry humor, subtle, unspoken, an understanding that the world is indifferent to incompetence yet occasionally rewards persistence. By sunset, I am tired, hungry, and just a little humbled. My limbs ache, my dignity is in tatters, and I have discovered that perhaps the greatest skill required in the Stone Age is not hunting or survival, but an ability to endure one's own spectacular failures with a sense of humor. I sit beside the fire, watching the sky shift from pale gold to deep violet, and make a mental note. Tomorrow, I forage. Hunting is clearly above my pay grade, yet even in failure, there is a gentle thrill. I am alive. The animals have evaded. Me, the neighbors, have succeeded, and I have stumbled through the day in a mixture of mud, misjudgment, and minor victories. The forest, beautiful and indifferent, continues to thrive, as do its inhabitants. And I, for all my shortcomings, remain a living, breathing testament to the slow, often humiliating process of learning to survive. Thus ends my first full day attempting to hunt in the Stone Age, a series of failures, bruises, and small, quiet victories. The fire flickers, shadows dance, and I contemplate the absurdity of my existence. Survival may not be glorious, but it is, at least, persistent. And sometimes persistence, however messy, is all one can hope for. The morning begins with a quiet, tentative hope. After the disastrous comedy of hunting yesterday, I have resolved to take the safer route, gathering. Berries, roots, nuts, leaves, things that cannot outrun me, things that do not possess claws, horns, or any vaguely sentient, judgmental consciousness. This, I reason, should be simple. Survival through passive collection, rather than active predation, seems like a reasonable compromise. I am, after all, nothing if not a cautious amateur. I step outside the cave, wincing as the sun reflects off damp surfaces, and begin my cautious exploration. The first order of business is identifying edible plants. Nature, for all its beauty, is a subtle and unforgiving teacher. The forest teems with greenery, much of which is tempting but entirely inedible, or worse, mildly poisonous. My education in this regard is virtually non-existent, which is a polite way of saying I am dangerously ignorant. Berries seem simple enough. Red, juicy, glistening in the morning light. Surely they are safe. I pluck a handful and inspect them, carefully imagining myself a competent gatherer. One I note is particularly large. I pop it into my mouth and immediately wonder whether red berries are supposed to taste faintly like regret. My stomach gurgles. I swallow quickly, hoping that nature will not retaliate. It does not. Today, at least, the berries are edible. Small. Victory. Encouraged, I move further into the thicket. Roots peek out of the soil like timid creatures. I tug at one, thinking it might serve as a hearty snack. It resists. I pull harder. The ground, apparently conspiring against me, gives only grudgingly, and the root snaps, sending me sprawling backward into a puddle. Mud coats my hands, my face, and my dignity. I note, for the record, that even gathering simple roots is not a task suited to my coordination. The forest is alive with subtle hazards. Bugs, for instance, possess both ambition and poor table manners. Mosquitoes appear out of nowhere, tiny harbingers of irritation, drilling into exposed skin with the precision of a jeweler. Ants march in disciplined columns across my feet. A spider descends from a branch and dangles before my face, eliciting a squeak that I deeply regret. Hygiene, it seems, is a concept defined loosely by survival rather than comfort. I wipe mud and sweat from my hands with a leaf, which accomplishes approximately nothing, but at least maintains the illusion of cleanliness. I move on to nuts, hoping for a more rewarding snack. Acorns, I discover, are abundant, but surprisingly heavy. Attempting to pick one without dropping it is like negotiating with gravity and poor muscle memory simultaneously. Several acorns fall, one striking a rock and ricocheting into the air before landing painfully on my foot. I howl, not in rage but in physical pain mingled with existential dismay. Somewhere nearby, a bird regards me with obvious amusement. Roots and leaves provide further lessons in the subtleties of edible versus inedible. One leaf, green and promising, tastes faintly like soap. Another, brown and suspicious, induces a mild but alarming digestive protest within minutes of consumption. The forest teaches quickly. Taste is not always a reliable indicator, and survival is often a matter of trial and error with increasingly painful consequences. I make a mental note to avoid anything that looks slightly unusual, although my track record suggests that my mental notes will be ignored with reckless abandon. While gathering, I attempt some minor improvisation to make life easier. I fashion a crude basket from woven vines, which in theory should hold my gathered bounty. In practice, it collapses repeatedly, spilling berries, nuts, and roots across the forest floor. I chase them down like an ineffectual toddler at a particularly aggressive picnic. The forest, it seems, has a sense of humor. I encounter more challenges than I expected. A thicket of brambles, thick and merciless, catches my clothes and scratches my arms. My hands bleed faintly. I mutter under my breath, imagining that this is some kind of character-building exercise, though the character being built is one of increasingly dramatic incompetence. Still, I persist, One cannot be picky about aesthetics when survival is at stake. Bugs continue to assert themselves as formidable opponents. Flies, relentlessly buzzing in my face, deliver a constant background. Curve irritation. One particularly bold wasp investigates my nostril. I panic, flail, and nearly topple into a patch of mud while attempting to dispatch it. The forest watches silently, the animals judging nothing but my ineptitude. I decide that insects, if nothing else, are both plentiful and terrifyingly indifferent to human skill or lack thereof. Lunch is a modest affair, a collection of berries, roots, and the occasional edible leaf. It is not glorious, not satisfying in a culinary sense, but it sustains me. I chew thoughtfully, pondering the remarkable patience and skill of my neighbors, who have likely already consumed a more substantial meal. I, meanwhile, remain the living embodiment of slow, graceless survival. I take a break beneath a tree, wiping sweat and dirt from my brow. The forest seems alive, teasing me with tiny victories. A berry that is sweet, a root that is firm, an acorn that does not land on my foot. And yet, every moment is punctuated by the constant reminder of my shortcomings. Coordination remains. Elusive, luck is inconsistent, and survival is a mixture of effort, error, and sheer stubbornness. I stumble upon a cluster of mushrooms. They look promising, brown, firm, and apparently stationary. My curiosity outweighs caution. I taste one. Instantly, I regret the decision. My stomach churns. I sit down, hands on knees, contemplating whether eating them constitutes bravery, stupidity, or a subtle rebellion against evolutionary advice. My conclusion: probably all three. Even seemingly safe tasks are fraught with peril. Gathering nuts involves heavy lifting, sharp shells, and the constant risk of dropping them on one's toes. Roots require digging, which exposes hands to dirt, thorns, and unexpected insects. Leaves are deceptively slippery, occasionally leading to minor falls and a generous sprinkling of embarrassment. Hygiene remains minimal, sweat and dirt coating every exposed surface. The forest is unforgiving yet beautiful, and I remain thoroughly inadequate. By late afternoon, my collection is modest but sufficient. Berries, roots, and a few nuts fill my crude basket. I have survived minor injuries, insect attacks, and the occasional nutritional misadventure. I sit, panting lightly, and consider the absurdity of my daily life. Here I am, a modern human dropped into the Stone Age, struggling with basic survival tasks that my ancestors performed with casual grace. My thoughts wander briefly to modern conveniences, running water, kitchens, stores full of food that does not bite back. The contrast is stark. Yet there is amusement to be found in my failure. Observing the forest, interacting with its creatures, and enduring repeated minor calamities provides a subtle, dry humor. My mistakes are constant, my luck dubious, and my skill practically non-existent, but I endure. There is something quietly satisfying about surviving through sheer persistence, even if that persistence resembles a series of uncoordinated flails. Evening approaches. My stomach is full enough, my wounds minor, and my dignity, though battered, is intact. I return to the cave with my modest bounty, noting the small triumphs amidst the constant absurd challenges of Stone Age life. Bugs crawl across the floor, the fire flickers welcomingly, and the world outside remains beautiful and indifferent. I reflect on the lessons of the day. Gathering, while safer than hunting, is still physically demanding, mildly hazardous, and thoroughly humiliating if one is as clumsy as I am. Edible items are unpredictable, insects are persistent, mud is unrelenting, coordination remains elusive, luck is capricious, and yet, somehow, I survive. In the dim light of the cave, I set down my modest collection. The berries, nuts, and roots, though meager, represent a small victory. A reminder that even an inept human like me can scrape through the day with persistence, patience, and perhaps a touch of absurd luck. I glance around, noting that tomorrow promises further trials. Hunting, foraging, learning, and inevitably failing in new and creative ways. For now, I am alive, fed, and just barely competent enough to reflect on the hilarity of my failures. The forest, indifferent and eternal, stretches beyond the cave entrance. I sit by the fire, marveling at its quiet warmth, and remind myself that survival is rarely glamorous, often painful, and always strangely entertaining when viewed from a slightly amused distance. The cave, one would think, is merely a shelter, a place to avoid the rain, sleep off minor injuries, and digest questionable meals in peace. In theory, this is true. In practice, the cave is a sprawling theatre of social absurdity, a place where every grunt, gesture, and poorly timed sneeze carries the weight of possible disaster. Morning light filters into the cave, illuminating the aftermath of our meager meals and minor misadventures. I sit near the fire, still attempting to regain some semblance of dignity after yesterday's mud wrestling with roots and berries. Around me, the tribe awakens, and the rules, unwritten, instinctive, and occasionally cruel, begin to assert themselves. Sharing food is paramount, a kind of social glue that distinguishes a successful cave community from one rapidly reduced to chaos. I offer my meager collection of berries to a neighbor who regards me with polite suspicion. Perhaps it is the way I present them, smeared with mud and faintly squished from my failed basket attempts. "Here," I grunt, imagining that my gesture exudes generosity and charm. He takes a berry, nods, and mutters a sound that I can only interpret as approval or mild disbelief. The ambiguity is classic Stone Age social interaction. One must learn to navigate it with caution. Fire duty is another crucial social rule, one that carries a delicate balance of prestige and misery. Whoever tends the fire is responsible for warmth, cooked food, and the occasional deterrence of curious predators. Yet this honor is often assigned by subtle hierarchy, alliances, and the unspoken understanding that failure will be noted and remembered. Yesterday, my attempts to light a fire were, as I recall, a slow-motion demonstration of incompetence. Today, I am delegated fire duty by default, a cruel nod to past failures. I kneel beside the embers, poking, fanning, and occasionally muttering, encouragements that may or may not be audible to the fire spirits. Social observation, however, is as vital to survival as physical skill. Neighbors interact with an ease I cannot replicate. Grunts, gestures, and shared glances carry volumes of unspoken meaning, a subtle language that defines alliances, rivalries, and potential mating opportunities. I attempt to decipher it, like, "Hey, tourist attempting to read a map upside down." Success is rare, misinterpretation is constant. Take, for instance, the ritual of storytelling. In theory, it is a communal delight, a time to recount heroic hunts, narrow escapes, or humorous encounters with beasts. In practice, it is an intricate performance requiring timing, tone, and the ability to sustain attention. Yesterday's failures. On the hunting front are fodder for tales now being recounted by my neighbors, who exaggerate, embellish, and occasionally invent events for comic effect. I sit, cheeks burning, a combination of embarrassment and mild sunburn, as the tribe laughs at exploits that, if truthfully narrated, would barely qualify as attempts. Flirting is a particular minefield. Gestures, subtle nudges, and sounds, grunts that might imply interest, must be interpreted with care. Misreading intent can result in ridicule, social ostracism, or in extreme cases, a minor beating. I attempt a gesture toward a female neighbor, who appears receptive, waving a hand casually and offering a particularly large berry as an icebreaker. She looks at me, raises an eyebrow, and then smacks my shoulder lightly with a branch, possibly affectionate, possibly corrective. The ambiguity is exhausting. Rivalries, meanwhile, are merciless and often hilarious. One male neighbor, more competent than I, approaches a task I have been fumbling with, and the tribe watches intently. He completes it with ease. I trip over a stray stone, attempting to emulate his movements. Laughter erupts, some sympathetic, some cruel. I nod, acknowledging the hierarchy, and silently vow that tomorrow I will trip over a different stone in a more dignified manner. Gestures can backfire spectacularly. I attempt a friendly pat on a neighbor's back, which instead results in an awkward stumble, knocking over a small pile of gathered roots. The roots scatter like confetti at a particularly tragic parade. The neighbor's expression is unreadable, somewhere between bemusement and disbelief. I smile nervously, imagining this is perceived as charm rather than chaos. I am probably wrong. Noise, too, carries unintended social consequences. A cough, a sneeze, or even an enthusiastic grunt can be misinterpreted. Yesterday, a sneeze nearly caused a panic over imagined predators. Today, a grunt meant to convey satisfaction with a berry is misread as mockery. Social faux pas in the Stone Age are immediate, visual, and often painful to one's pride. Hygiene, or the near absence of it, adds further complication to social interactions. Dirt, sweat, and the faint aroma of yesterday's minor misadventures cling to clothing and skin. Close proximity to others necessitates subtle negotiation of personal space, a negotiation in which I am spectacularly inexperienced. A neighbor leans in, sniffing the air with interest I misinterpret as friendly. In truth, they are likely assessing my suitability as a contributor to the tribe's hygiene standards. The assessment is not favorable. Despite, or perhaps because, of these challenges, social life in the cave is oddly engaging. Each day presents new opportunities for misinterpretation, small victories, and lessons in humility. Watching others succeed while failing spectacularly myself creates a strange mixture of admiration, envy, and self-deprecating humor. One must find amusement wherever one can in a world that is indifferent to incompetence. Evening brings communal meals during which the tribe gathers to share food, warmth, and stories. My contributions are modest, berries, a few roots, and the occasional nut, but accepted nonetheless. Sharing is a social currency. Generosity, even in small measure, earns respect or at least tolerance. I sit cross-legged, teeth chewing, mind racing with observations. One neighbor recounts a daring hunt. Another embellishes a humorous encounter with a predator. I add nothing. I smile, nod, and appreciate that survival in the Stone Age relies as much on observation as action. Emotional nuance is conveyed largely through facial expressions and subtle movements. A raised brow, a slight grunt, a casual tilt of the head. These are all communication. I attempt to mimic, often poorly. A nod intended to signal agreement is taken as a challenge. A smile meant to convey friendliness is misinterpreted as arrogance. Each day is a careful dance between misunderstanding and survival. There are moments of absurdity. A neighbor attempts to offer a gesture of flirtation, only for it to be entirely misread by another member of the tribe, resulting in what can only be described as prehistoric chaos. Grunts, gesticulations, and minor physical confrontations ensue. I watch from a safe distance, appreciating the comedy of it all, and silently congratulate myself on my temporary invisibility. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of caveman social life is the potential for embarrassment. Social faux pas are immediate and unforgiving. A misplaced grunt, an ill-timed sneeze, a botched gesture, all can result in ridicule, scorn, or more physical consequences. I navigate this minefield with care, though my track record suggests that survival may require more luck than skill. By nightfall, I have endured the full spectrum of Stone Age social interaction: awkward gestures, misunderstood flirtations, minor ridicule, and the subtle thrill of small victories. The fire burns low, casting long shadows across the cave walls. I sit, exhausted, muddy and fed, reflecting on the absurdity and complexity of communal life. Even in a world so primitive, social rules govern behavior with an elegance that is simultaneously brutal and amusing. Alliances form and dissolve in seconds, gestures carry volumes, and each small action has consequences. I am humbled, bemused, and occasionally terrified. And yet, in the quiet moments, I also feel a strange camaraderie, the shared struggle of survival, the small triumphs and the humorous failures that bind the tribe together. Thus ends another day in the cave. My body aches, my dignity is battered, and my social skills are aspirational at best. But I am alive. I have eaten, observed, and participated. I have learned, again, that survival is not only a matter of physical skill, but also of navigating the strange, unpredictable, and endlessly entertaining world of primitive social life. The day begins with the ambitious notion that I, too, can contribute to the tribe's collective arsenal of survival. Weapons, tools, implements of all sizes and sharpness levels, these are the hallmarks of a functional caveman. I, however, am not a functional caveman. I am more accurately described as a catastrophic observer of evolution, armed with nothing but stubbornness, poor coordination, and a vague understanding of physics. My first task: a spear. Surely the simplest tool in existence. A sharpened stick. A pointy end, a splash of courage, and one should be ready to hunt. The stick I select is promising, straightish and of adequate length. I sharpen it against a rock, imagining myself a prehistoric artisan. Reality intervenes swiftly. The rock slips from my grasp, striking my thumb and producing a sharp, high-pitched yelp that likely startled several small animals and possibly a neighboring caveman. Pain sharp, ego bruised, I lick my thumb and continue, muttering under my breath about how primitive technology is deceptively unforgiving. Shaping the spear is an exercise in futility. One end snaps mid-sharpening. I attempt to lash the broken halves together with vine, a makeshift solution that might have worked if I had any experience in knot tying, or if the vine possessed adhesive properties beyond the entirely hypothetical. Instead, the spear now resembles a vaguely threatening stick wobbling in all directions. I brandish it with as much confidence as possible, which is to say none at all. Rocks, I discover, are both my allies and enemies. Attempting to fashion a cutting tool from flint proves particularly hazardous. My first strike sends a shard flying into my cheek. My second strike leaves my hand sore and bleeding. By the fifth, I have produced something that might qualify as a blade, if one's standards are exceptionally low. I hold it up proudly, imagining that it could at least slice through soft vegetation or, if desperate, a particularly unlucky berry. My neighbor regards me silently. The look is ambiguous: admiration, pity, or horror. I'm too afraid to ask. Small victories are rare but delicious. A stick fashioned into a crude digging implement works adequately for unearthing roots. The dirt clings to my hands and face, mud streaked across my arms like some prehistoric war paint. I admire my own ingenuity briefly, only to trip over an uneven rock and spill the roots I so carefully uncovered. The forest, I suspect, is quietly mocking me. Attempting to create a hammer from a rock and a sturdy stick proves no less challenging. Tying the two together requires patience, dexterity, and perhaps a degree of intelligence I cannot summon at will. The rock slips from the bindings repeatedly. On one particularly ambitious swing, the hammer ricochets from the rock I am attempting to strike, grazing my shoulder. The sensation is painful yet mildly humbling. I am reminded that real cavemen likely developed these tools over weeks, not minutes, and probably had far fewer bruises. Improvisation is a constant companion. I fashion a makeshift knife by sharpening a small rock and lashing it to a stick with vine. Testing its efficacy involves cautiously attempting to slice a soft root. The root resists. My hands, slick with sweat and mud, allow the knife to slip, nicking my palm. I curse softly, imagining that this is all part of a rigorous training regimen, though in reality it is just another in a long series of minor injuries. Observing neighbors is instructive, though somewhat disheartening. They move with an ease I cannot replicate. A man carves a fish with a flint blade, precise and elegant. Another constructs a bow with subtle angles and careful tension, looking like an artisan in motion. I attempt the same motions and create something that resembles more a random collection of sticks than a functional weapon. My efforts, I suspect, are recorded somewhere in the caveman annals under the heading hilarious failure. The forest is no less unforgiving. While attempting to whittle a spear tip, I topple into a small stream. My stick, partially sharpened, floats downstream, leaving me damp, muddy, and demoralized. The water is cold, insects are abundant, and my dignity is entirely submerged alongside the stick. I watch the current carry it away and consider a career change to a profession that requires less manual dexterity. Perhaps sitting quietly. Small successes are punctuated by spectacular failures. A club fashioned from a heavy branch works adequately for smacking small shrubs. Attempting to swing it at a tree to test its sturdiness results in the branch snapping mid-swing and nearly striking me in the head. I stumble backward, falling into a patch of nettles which sting mercilessly. At this point, I am acutely aware that my contributions to caveman toolmaking are a mixture of determination, chaos, and the occasional minor triumph. Sharp implements present particular hazards. I attempt a crude flint knife, testing it on a piece of wood. The knife slips, grazing my finger. I grimace, mutter something indecipherable, and gingerly wrap my hand in a strip of cloth. The irony is not lost on me. Survival tools are simultaneously necessary and hazardous, and I am learning the latter far faster than the former. Improvising further, I attempt to create a sling. The concept is simple: a strip of hide, a small rock, and an understanding of mechanics. Execution, however, is entirely beyond me. The first launch sends the rock ricocheting wildly, narrowly missing a neighbor who looks at me with thinly veiled horror. The second launch hits a tree, embedding itself in bark. I attempt a third. The rock ricochets into a bush, startling birds and a small squirrel. By the fourth, I am exhausted, sore, and increasingly aware that sling making is not a casual pastime. Every tool, it seems, demands patience, skill, and coordination. I possess none of these qualities in abundance. Rocks slip, sticks break, vines unravel, and I am left with a collection of implements that are only marginally functional and mostly embarrassing. Yet, each small success, fashioning a root digging, stick, sharpening a rock without injuring myself, is celebrated quietly. Small victories are essential, particularly when surrounded by evidence of my spectacular failures. My neighbors offer subtle lessons, though I am rarely aware of them in the moment. One demonstrates a method for attaching a stone blade to a handle, moving with practiced ease. I attempt to replicate it, tying the stone to a stick with vine. The vine loosens, the stone slides, and I accidentally fling it into the distance. The neighbor shakes his head gently, perhaps silently wishing me better luck tomorrow. By late afternoon, my arms ache, my hands are scraped, and my forehead glistens with sweat. Mud coats my legs and arms, a testament to both determination and the forest's persistent obstacles. My crude tools, while functional in a very limited sense, are no match for a real caveman's ingenuity. The contrast is stark. I am reminded that primitive technology is deceptively complex. Rocks, sticks, and vines form the backbone of survival, yet wielding them effectively is an art, one I have clearly not mastered. Nevertheless, persistence remains my ally. I attempt one final spear, shaping it with care, testing its balance, and bracing myself for success. The result is adequate, not elegant, not impressive, but it holds together. I brandish it with cautious pride. It may not kill a mammoth, but it could perhaps frighten a particularly small and non-threatening animal. The accomplishment, minor though it is, feels significant. Progress, however incremental, is progress nonetheless. By sunset, I survey the chaos of my day. Tools and weapons lie scattered across the forest floor: broken sticks, sharp rocks, frayed vines, and one modestly functional spear. My body aches, my hands are bleeding in multiple places, and my face bears faint scratches. Yet I am alive. I have created, destroyed, failed, and occasionally succeeded, and in a world where survival demands skill and ingenuity, persistence, awkward, bumbling, and error-prone, is its own form of triumph. As I return to the cave, my neighbors already gathered by the fire, I carry my collection of tools, a mix of disasters and minor successes. They glance at me, assessing the day's productivity. I smile awkwardly, nod, and pretend that my blisters, mud, and mangled implements are evidence of mastery rather than the honest truth. I am an enthusiastic, moderately dangerous amateur, at best. And yet, in the quiet of the evening, I reflect on the absurdity of my attempts. Survival, I realize, is as much about creativity, persistence, and resilience as it is about raw skill. I have learned, painfully, that primitive technology is not simple. Rocks, sticks, and vines may seem obvious, but wielding them effectively requires dexterity, patience, and a near-obsessive attention to detail. qualities I possess only sporadically. Still, there is humor to be found in failure. Watching a rock ricochet harmlessly, observing a vine unravel spectacularly, or nearly impaling oneself with a homemade blade provides endless amusement in retrospect. The forest is indifferent to my misadventures, yet it offers lessons in patience, ingenuity, and the limits of human coordination. By nightfall, I sit beside the fire, tools arrayed in front of me like a bizarre gallery of triumph and disaster. My body aches, my hands are bandaged in makeshift fashion, and my pride is simultaneously bruised and oddly buoyed by my perseverance. I have survived the day, created something vaguely functional, and learned again that success in the stone, age is measured not by elegance but by endurance, creativity, and a willingness to laugh quietly at one's own spectacular missteps. The sun sinks below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of burnt orange and somber purple, and I am acutely aware that nightfall is both inevitable and terrifying. The day's minor triumphs, tools fashioned, roots gathered, berries plucked, fade into the background as one pressing concern asserts itself with relentless clarity: sleep. In the Stone Age, sleeping is not a gentle, cozy drift into unconsciousness. It is a precarious negotiation with gravity, insects, predators, and the occasional ill-tempered rock. I lie down on the cave floor, which, I remind myself repeatedly, is not designed for comfort. A few stones jut from the ground like cruel little sentinels mocking any attempt at horizontal relaxation. I shift repeatedly, attempting to find a position that does not leave my spine in permanent protest. My elbows, knees, and back all register minor complaints, each punctuated by the occasional grunt of discomfort. In retrospect, it is hard to imagine a mattress or even a pillow existing in this time period, and I silently mourn the modern concept of luxury. Insects, as I have discovered, are the night's first and most persistent adversaries. Mosquitoes appear in numbers that would make any modern exterminator weep. Flies circle lazily, occasionally landing on my nose or eyelid. A spider descends from a ceiling crevice and dangles precariously above my face, its tiny legs tickling in a way I can only describe as existentially irritating. I swat, flail, and mutter under my breath, achieving only minor victories and widespread disorganization. The fire, though still smouldering from my ongoing efforts at tending it, does little to combat the creeping chill. Night air seeps into the cave, sharp and insistent. I pull a fur blanket, or what passes for one, closer around my shoulders, though it is modest in its effectiveness. My teeth chatter faintly, a sound that would likely elicit concern in modern life, but here serves as a reminder of the harsh reality. Warmth is earned, not granted, and comfort is a luxury reserved for the imaginative mind. Predators lurk in the darkness beyond the cave entrance. The forest is alive with the rustling of unseen creatures. A branch snaps, the underbrush shifts, and my imagination fills in the gaps with snarling jaws and glowing eyes. The wolf, the bear, the overly ambitious raccoon, all may be plotting my demise, and I am left to imagine escape routes, while simultaneously hoping no predator has taken an interest in the aroma of mud, berries, and minor self-pity that clings to me. Rival tribes are another concern, though less immediate than the forest's natural inhabitants. The sound of distant shouting, the occasional clash of sticks or rocks, reminds me that social boundaries extend far beyond polite gestures and shared fire duties. Any misstep in social interaction or territorial trespass could result in a serious altercation, and I lie awake pondering how one misinterpreted grunt could escalate into full-blown chaos. The stress is subtle but constant, a background hum of potential disaster that ensures alertness is mandatory. Sleep, therefore, is a complicated negotiation. I shift yet again, finding a rock particularly unyielding beneath my shoulder. I attempt to lie on my side, imagining a position that minimizes pressure points while maximizing survival. I fail. My neck protests. My back complains. I adjust, sigh and mutter faintly about modern luxuries. A mattress, a pillow, a temperature-controlled room, Wi-Fi to distract from existential terror. Such amenities, I note, would drastically improve the odds of survival, or at least the quality of the complaints one might lodge to the universe. I roll onto my stomach. Perhaps this will help. The result? The small of my back presses against a jagged stone while my knees graze the floor. Comfort is a fleeting concept, easily disrupted by nature, necessity, or personal incompetence. I attempt to focus on breathing, though each inhale carries the faint scent of mud, berries, and minor self-pity. It is not pleasant, yet it is mine, and I cling to it as a small anchor in a world indifferent to my suffering. Insects continue their assault with relentless dedication. Mosquitoes hum in my ears like miniature electric drills. Flies land briefly on my cheek, departing only to be replaced by others. A particularly aggressive beetle decides to crawl along my forearm. I flick it away, only to send it flying into my hair, where it disappears with an ominous rustling. I imagine it taking up residence, judging my life choices silently, and consider a new mantra: patience, endurance, humor. The forest beyond the cave is equally alive with danger. Rustling leaves hint at wolves, perhaps stalking silently for an easy meal. A distant growl reminds me that apex predators exist, and that my day's gathering efforts could be rendered irrelevant in seconds. Rain begins to fall lightly, tapping against the cave entrance in a pattern both soothing and menacing. Water seeps into small cracks, chilling my extremities, and reminding me that insulation is a concept best left to the imagination. I shift again. One foot encounters a particularly sharp rock, eliciting a grunt that may or may not have startled a nearby rodent. I attempt to stretch it into a more comfortable position, only to send my elbow knocking into another uneven surface. Pain flares, I mutter faintly, and adjust again. It is a constant battle of improvisation, a negotiation between body, cave, and the relentless insistence of nature that comfort is not guaranteed. As night deepens, my mind drifts to modern problems, or, more accurately, modern luxuries: a warm bed, a thick blanket, running water, Wi-Fi. These are not needs, they are miracles. Here I am left to contend with dirt, insects, mud, and uneven rock, and I reflect on my inability to appreciate these comforts fully until they are gone. I imagine the modern human, blissfully unaware of the hazards just beyond the cave entrance, and feel a pang of both envy and absurd self-pity. Self-pity, I note, is unavoidable, yet oddly comforting. I lie in the darkness, feet cold, back aching, hair matted with mud, and marvel at the absurdity of my life. Minor injuries ache in the dim light of the fire. Every small discomfort, scratched arm, sore shoulder, stubbed toe, is amplified by the knowledge that there is no soft mattress, no aspirin, no civilized world to rescue me. And yet, in the humor of my predicament, I find solace. My suffering is absurd, my complaints ridiculous, and my survival tenuous, but it is undeniably mine. Shadows dance on the cave walls, flickering from the fire's dying light. I imagine eyes watching me from outside, predators or curious neighbors alike. I tug the fur closer, shiver, and remind myself that adaptation is key, even if my adaptation is limited to flailing slightly less catastrophically than before. Mine drifts between vigilance and exhaustion, a delicate balance that prevents sleep, yet encourages reflection. The wind howls softly, stirring loose rocks and sending a chill through the cave. Insects continue their midnight symphony. Somewhere in the distance an animal cries, and I imagine it plotting my demise in collaboration with the forest's other residents. I adjust yet again, finding the hard rock beneath my shoulder still particularly unyielding. I imagine a modern bed, soft, supportive, absurdly luxurious, and feel a profound mixture of envy and wistfulness. Despite the discomfort, there is a strange rhythm tonight in the cave. The fire crackles intermittently, casting fleeting warmth and light. Insects pause occasionally, giving me minor reprieves. The sounds of the forest, while menacing, are predictable enough to create a background pattern. I focus on this rhythm, allowing it to ground me, even as my mind wanders through minor catastrophes and humorous recollections of the day's disasters. I reflect on the absurdity of my life, mud-streaked, berry-stained, scratched, cold, and minimally successful in all attempts at survival. And yet, here I am, still alive, still observing, still capable of quiet self-amusement. Modern humans might worry about emails, bills, or Wi-Fi outages. I, by contrast, worry about insects, predators, and the unyielding discomfort of the cave floor. Perspective, I note, is everything. Eventually, fatigue begins to assert itself. Muscles scream less, insects seem less aggressive, and the chill, while still present, becomes manageable. I close my eyes briefly, appreciating the absurdity of resting on such an inhospitable surface. Dreams, if they arrive, are likely to involve misplaced berries, runaway sticks, or minor injuries, yet even dreams provide a respite from waking vigilance. In the end, night in the Stone Age is a delicate mixture of discomfort, danger, and humor. Every ache, every insect bite, every cold gust is both a challenge and a reminder of the absurdity of my situation. I lie, shivering, dreaming vaguely of modern beds and running water, and smile faintly at the ridiculousness of my persistence, and so night passes slowly, punctuated by minor catastrophes, fleeting comforts, and the constant awareness that survival is neither gentle nor guaranteed. I lie awake, half exhausted, half humored, and entirely human, mud-stained, insect-bitten, and quietly proud that I have survived another day in the absurd theater of the Stone Age. As dawn breaks, or more accurately, as I reluctantly pry my eyes open to a sky that has not asked my permission to exist, I am struck by a quiet, unavoidable truth. Survival in the Stone Age is a full-time occupation, and I, despite my best efforts, am spectacularly unqualified. The thought is both humbling and hilarious. A modern human with all the conveniences of running water, soft chairs, and even the occasional takeaway, transported 50,000 years into the past, flailing through each task with grace roughly equivalent to a falling log. I reflect on the last week, or more accurately, the last few days, which feel like decades, of attempting basic survival. Each task, from waking on a rock to fending off insects, constructing rudimentary tools and pretending competence while socializing, has been a series of minor catastrophes. If survival were measured in elegance or skill, I would not make it. Past day one. If measured in sheer persistence, I am marginally ahead, though barely. Consider the essentials. Food. Gathering berries, roots, and nuts is both physically demanding and mentally exhausting. I have tripped over roots, been stung by nettles, and nearly consumed questionable mushrooms with digestive consequences that are difficult to describe politely. Hunting, I recall with fondness and horror, involved close encounters with animals that were distinctly less interested in friendship than in my immediate demise. Every spear thrown, every flint knife sharpened, and every makeshift club swung was a reminder that Stone Age survival is not a hobby, but an endurance test administered by nature with a dry, cruel sense of humor. Shelter, too, is a constant challenge. The cave is cold, damp, and punctuated with stones strategically placed to maximize discomfort. Sleep is a negotiation with uneven rock, insects, and the occasional curious animal. Each night, I wrestle with my fur blanket, swat mosquitoes with heroic ineffectiveness, and silently curse the absence of a mattress or temperature control. Modern humans complain about noise, allergies, or the Wi-Fi being down. I lie awake, feet frozen, back aching, listening to the distant growl of predators and reflecting on the absurdity of my situation. Hygiene, if one can call it that, is almost laughably non-existent. Dirt, mud, and the faint aroma of berry juice cling to every inch of exposed skin. Each attempt at washing in a stream is a battle with temperature, insects, and gravity. And yet, in this absence of cleanliness, social expectations remain. I must navigate complex social dynamics, sharing food, avoiding faux pas, and deciphering gestures and grunts that carry volumes of unspoken meaning. Misinterpretation leads to embarrassment, ridicule, and the occasional minor injury. Every day is a lesson in humility, patience, and the occasional absurdity of being thoroughly unqualified. Tools, weapons, and fire are other domains in which my inadequacy becomes painfully clear. Rocks slip, sticks break, vines unravel. My attempts to create functional implements often result in minor injuries, flung objects, and tools so awkward that they are better described as dangerous art installations than survival necessities. I watch neighbors move with fluid skill, carving spears, fashioning knives, and tending fires with a natural grace I will never possess. Each minor success I achieve, digging a root without incident, fashioning a spear that doesn't immediately fall apart, is celebrated quietly. Because in a world designed to humble the incompetent, even the smallest victory feels monumental. Nighttime, as always, is a trial. Sleep is both essential and nearly impossible. The floor is hard. Insects are abundant. Temperature is unkind. Predators lurk beyond the cave entrance, and the mind, left unoccupied, fills in every shadow with snarling jaws, glowing eyes, or rival tribesmen plotting mischief. Even the act of resting requires vigilance, patience, and a willingness to accept discomfort as an unchangeable constant. Modern humans would call this roughing it. I call it the daily humbling that comes with being spectacularly unqualified. And yet, through all this struggle, the humor remains. The absurdity of my incompetence is as much a survival tool as the berries and roots I gather. Tripping over a root while attempting to emulate a neighbor's graceful movement, accidentally catapulting a rock intended for a flint knife experiment into a distant bush, or misreading a flirtatious gesture, these minor disasters provide both entertainment and perspective. Life in the Stone Age is brutal, but it is also absurdly, darkly, hilariously human. The broader reflection emerges slowly as one tends to notice the patterns of repeated failure. Modern humans, those blissfully unaware, comfortably ensconced in warmth and running water, have no idea how easy life has become. Turning on a tap, preparing a meal in a microwave, adjusting a thermostat, or even complaining about slow Wi-Fi is a luxury beyond the comprehension of a caveman. Every modern convenience represents centuries of trial, error, and ingenuity that I now, painfully, understand through contrast. I am a pale, mud-streaked monument to how truly fragile human comfort is when stripped to its basic components: food, water, shelter, warmth, and skill. I imagine myself failing spectacularly at every critical survival task, gathering edible roots, misstep, mud, nettles, and minor injury. Hunting, embarrassment, bruises, and near-death encounters. Tool-making, splinters, broken rocks, and projectile injuries. Fire, smoke inhalation, and repeated flailing. Social interactions, misinterpretations, awkward gestures, and minor humiliation. Nighttime, insects, predators, and constant discomfort. It is a catalogue of errors, each entry a testament to the difficulty of a life unsoftened by modern conveniences. And yet, there is a strange comfort in this reflection. Humor, dry and understated, is both a coping mechanism and a survival strategy. By observing my own failures with detachment, by noting the absurdity in every minor catastrophe, I preserve my sanity. Even in a world designed to humble the incompetent, laughter, quiet, dry, self-directed laughter, becomes a small but essential refuge. It is clear then that survival beyond a few weeks is improbable for someone like me. I am physically uncoordinated, socially awkward, and prone to poor judgment in critical moments. My ingenuity is sporadic, my luck inconsistent, and my capacity for sustained manual labor limited. If evolution required a crash course in humility, I have aced it spectacularly. Yet, paradoxically, in acknowledging my limitations, I gain insight into the resilience, skill, and sheer competence required to survive in a world without modern luxuries. The moral, if one can call it that, is simple and gentle. You are not a caveman. Congratulations. Your bed is soft, your food is prepared, your water runs at the turn of a tap, and Wi-Fi delivers distraction and comfort on demand. Life is easy, accidents are minor, and the world, while imperfect, is far less immediately threatening than a mud-streaked forest filled with predators, insects, and awkward social dynamics. You may stumble in daily life, spill your coffee, or misinterpret a text message. But you are alive, safe, and blissfully unaware of the daily indignities a true caveman endures. In this reflection, there is both relief and humor. My failures are absurd. My minor victories are small. Yet each day, each trial, each scrape and bruise teaches a lesson in humility, perseverance, and the absurdity of human endeavor. The Stone Age is brutal, relentless, and unforgiving. And I, despite the spectacle of my incompetence, have survived, long enough to reflect, laugh, and if one squints optimistically, even learn. So as the fire dies down, as insects hum their final lullabies, and as night settles over the cave, I rest, not in comfort, not in luxury, but in the quiet knowledge that survival is absurd, challenging, and hilariously difficult, and by contrast, that modern life is a miracle of ease. I close my eyes, chest rising and falling unevenly, fingers bruised, muscles sore, and smile faintly. You are not a caveman. Congratulations, and may your bed remain soft, your Wi-Fi stable, and your berries pre-washed. And now, as the final embers of imagination fade, let us return, slowly, gently, with as much dignity as one can muster, to the present day. Stretch your arms, flex your fingers, and feel the absurd luxury of upright posture. No mud-streaked arms, no scrabbling insects, no mysterious bruises. Instead, you are nestled comfortably in your bed, soft sheets against your skin, blankets piled high enough to elicit a sense of smug satisfaction. The cold, damp horrors of a prehistoric cave are left behind, replaced with warmth, safety, and a rather alarming number of pillows. Perhaps you stretch one leg lazily under the covers, feeling the mattress support your body in ways that would surely have been revolutionary to anyone 50,000 years ago. You may even reach for a cup of something warm, a hot beverage that requires zero foraging, no fire tending, no awkwardly flung rocks to achieve boiling temperature. Coffee, tea, or hot chocolate, the choice is yours, and it is glorious. It's slowly appreciating the contrast. One moment you imagine yourself flailing in the mud, desperately trying to catch a root or carve a stick. The next you are cocooned in comfort, the steam rising in gentle tendrils toward your nose. It is remarkable, almost laughable, to consider the gulf between ancient struggle and modern convenience. Water runs on demand. Food arrives ready to eat, requiring only minimal effort, or at worst a quick trip to a grocery store where no mammoth or bear is involved. The bed is soft, the temperature is regulated, the Wi-Fi works. The only insects present are those you invited in the form of a cheerful tabby or a mildly judgmental spider, and they are trivial opponents at best. You may find your mind wandering back to the day's imaginary adventures, tripping over roots, being mocked by grunting neighbors, narrowly avoiding predator attacks. Smile faintly at these memories, for they are absurd, exaggerated, and yet strangely educational. They remind you of how ridiculously fortunate your life is, how gently cushioned your modern existence has become, and how improbable it would be for someone like me, or by extension you, to survive a week in a mud-streaked, insect-ridden cave surrounded by nature's most indifferent teachers. Notice, as you nestle deeper into your blankets, that each minor discomfort you may feel, a stiff shoulder, a lingering ache, a slightly cold toe, is trivial in comparison. Compare it, if you dare, to sleeping on jagged rocks, swatting mosquitoes incessantly, or enduring the cold and damp while simultaneously attempting to carve tools or catch breakfast with your bare hands. It is almost unfair, really, how cushioned modern life is, and yet we complain with such fervor about the smallest inconveniences. Allow yourself a quiet chuckle at the absurdity of it all, the contrast between the epic struggle of ancient survival and the effortless ease of your present existence. The universe, in its quiet wisdom, or perhaps cruel irony, has placed you firmly in a world where discomfort is optional, danger is mostly abstract, and sleep is indulgent rather than a daily negotiation with life itself. As you settle further, perhaps take a moment to imagine your caveman counterpart, a muddied, bruised, and perpetually exhausted version of yourself, sighing in despair at the impossibility of life. He or she is still flailing, still misjudging the distance to Rocks, still wrestling with vine-bound implements, still enduring insects, cold, hunger, and the subtle judgment of the entire tribe. Meanwhile, you are here, safe, warm, and relatively dry, contemplating this ridiculous parallel with quiet amusement. And so, as your body relaxes, as blankets envelop you, as the steam from your beverage rises gently and fades, take a slow, deep breath. Feel the softness beneath you, the warmth around you, the luxury of life's simple conveniences. There are no predators here, no unyielding rocks, no insects plotting subtle revenge. Just you, comfortably cocooned, drifting towards sleep. Remember quietly, Riley, that you are profoundly lucky. Modern life is a miracle of ease compared to the world that once was. Your bed, your blankets, your hot beverage, even your ability to turn off the lights at will. All these are small blessings that our prehistoric ancestors could scarcely imagine. And unlike me, flailing helplessly in a loincloth and mud, you are free to surrender to sleep without concern, free to dream without danger, free to appreciate the simple absurdity of your safe, cushioned existence. So, as you close your eyes, surrendering to the gentle pull of rest, allow a smile to form. Consider it a tiny nod to the absurdity of survival, the humor in failure, and the unending gratitude for modern comfort. Sleep well tonight, knowing that you are, unequivocally, better off than me in a loincloth.